Decalogue, logos, word, decalogue, like decade, decennial. So 10 words. Originally, the text, even in English, it says, then God spoke all these words, not all these commandments, all these words. So Decalogue literally translates 10 words. What do we have in this Decalogue? This is the epitome of duties towards God and neighbor. There are two traditions that are very prominent here. That's why there could be confusion when you read this. I will give you one example. Chapter 19:25 says, Moses goes down the mountain to speak to the people. That's verse 25. While in chapter 20, verse 1, God communicates the 10 commandments rather abruptly. See, when Moses is with the people, that's how chapter 19 ends. But immediately after that, we have an abrupt statement. God spoke all these words. To whom? Now Moses is with the people. 2019, Moses, or God's direct speaking to them will result in death. Moses would speak to God. Only most because of the idea of the Elohist tradition, the God cannot speak directly to the people, but he speaks through the mediator. And Moses is the mediator in the book of Exodus. But in verse 22, the Lord said to Moses, thus you shall say to the Israelites. So Yahweh is directly speaking to Moses. So there are different traditions merging. So therefore, there is the possibility of getting confused because of different traditions there. The tradition would like to say that Yahweh uh, cannot speak, or Elohim speaks through Moses. Moses is the mediator. He is the go between God and the people of Israel. Let's quickly go into the text. These words, or the 10 words, Decalogue, we have these words in chapter 34:28 of Exodus, Deuteronomy 4:13 and 14. That is why it is technically called Decalogue. Decalogue, meaning 10 words. They are taken from these references in Exodus and Deuteronomy. Originally, or in all probability, each commandment was a short utterance, as you see in verse 13. You shall not murder. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. So they were all simple, a short utterance. In Hebrew, it will be just one, uh, actually, negation plus one word. Whole commandment is just one word. For example, law means do not. Okay, so do not kill. That do not commit adultery. Do not steal. They are easy for people to commit to memory. Um, Many other texts, for example, the commandment in verse 8, the commandment is to keep holy the Sabbath. What follows after that, from verse 9 to 11, is the explanation. Sorry, is the explanation. Commandment is to keep holy the Sabbath. Verse 8. Instead, 9, 10, 11, they are explanation how you are going to keep the Sabbath holy. Um, I have given there the text. There are so many um, modification to this commandment in different parts of the Pentateuch. How one should keep the Sabbath, observe the Sabbath. The rabbis would give more explanation. And at the time of Jesus, we know there were strict rules with regard to the observance of Sabbath. Yahweh proclaimed the Decalogue directly to the people, while other laws and teachings were given through Moses. See, look at chapter 20. It begins, God spoke all these words. And the previous passage, we know that Moses is with the people. Moses is not on the mountain. So, according to Exodus, Yahweh directly proclaimed the Decalogue to the people, while many other explanation of these laws and teachings were given to Moses by God, and later Moses would repeat that to the people who were waiting outside. Now, I would share with you an information. See, all of us are very familiar with the Decalogue in our catechism and preparation for First Communion and confirmation, etc. We have studied it several times, and before confession, when we were children, we were informed and we were reminded about these Ten Commandments and so on. Now, there are variants of Ten Commandments in the Bible. There are different traditions in the Bible itself. For example, uh, J tradition has a version of the commandment in chapter 34 of Exodus. That is coming from the J tradition. It is called ritual decalogue. Ritual decalogue about the observances and so on. Now, what we are doing right now, chapter 20, 1 to 17, is ethical decalogue. A ritual decalogue from the J tradition, ethical decalogue from the E tradition. Still, there is D tradition. It's called Deuteronomy, from Deuteronomy, chapter 5, 6 to 21. That is slightly different from the E version that we are seeing right now. And yet, there is one more Decalogue, which is by the priestly writer, that is found in the book of Leviticus, chapter 19. It's called Levitical Decalogue. So, do not think that all the versions of that so-called Decalogue are same. No, there are differences. And even in the different churches, different denominations, there are different versions of the Decalogue. I'll just mention a few maybe as the coming slide. Um, as I mentioned, we get the term Ten Commandments from these references. And that's why they are in these chapters 34, 28, 25, 16. Deuteronomy 4:13, 10, 4, etc. Explicitly, they are called 10 words or 10 commandments. That's for example, 25, 16. You shall put into the ark the covenant that I shall give you. The commandment. It's not a word, actually. Here it is not the word. Same. Deuteronomy 4:13. 4:13. He declared to you his covenant. He charged you to observe, that is the 10 commandments. 10 commandments. What is that? Okay. Um, Instead, the Hebrew word actually is words. The translation is commandments. That's why the 10 commandments are not today called as 10 words, although Decalogue means that, but they are called 10 commandments because many translations they are called as 10 commandments. Okay. Then there are two ways of dividing the 10 commandments. Which are they? The Greek fathers and the Orthodox tradition and the Reformed churches, they follow one pattern. While the Catholic and the Lutheran churches, we have a different pattern. So there are basically two systems of dividing the Ten Commandments. I'll give you a summary of these two divisions. See, as I said, the first division is by the Greek fathers, the Orthodox churches, and the Reformed churches. The second division that I have given is basically followed by the Catholic tradition and the Lutheran traditions. The first division, the first commandment is verse 22 to 3. Instead, in the Catholic and Lutheran churches, the first commandment is from 3 to 6, that you shall have no other gods before me. But in the Greek tradition, Orthodox tradition, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, so on. You shall not have other gods before me. So I just placed it according to the tradition. As you see, they're not same, not exactly same. Um, Third commandment 27, and third commandment in the Catholic tradition is 28 to 11. Um, the fourth commandment, okay, oh, we are familiar with the fourth commandment: honor your father and mother. This is the fourth commandment for the Greek Orthodox. Fourth commandment is keeping Sabbath, keeping holy the Sabbath. So there is a variation. Okay? So do rest of the commandments. I will. There is a major difference in the ninth commandment, and I will explain what it is. See, the main difference comes in the order of considering chapter 20, verse 2 to 7 as the first few commandments. And splitting over 2017, 2017, that is split into two. See, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, the ox, donkey, and so on. Anything that belongs to your neighbor. Um, so neighbor's property, neighbor's house, um, and which is enumerated in the second part of the verse is wife, male or female slave, and so on. Now, issue is like this. The Hebrew mentality, wives were husband's possessions like any other material possessions. Hence, they considered chapter 20, verse 17 a single commandment equating neighbor's wife with his material possessions like a house, slaves, or animals. So they go together in their list of commandments. Since the neighbor's wife is equal to neighbor's material possessions like house, slaves, and animals, the whole thing was included as one commandment. While in the Catholic and Lutheran traditions, they are divided into two, um, 9 and 10. 9 and 10. Because the tradition, Catholic tradition, recognizing the dignity of women, although there are conflicts with this biblical division. So the 10th commandment is separate from the 9th commandment in order to recognize the dignity of women. So women is not as equal to the property like house and animals of the husband. Okay. Coming back to the text chapter 20 verse 2, in the Jewish tradition, the verse 2 is part of the first commandment. Although this is a preface that summarizes the meaning of the Exodus. You know, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So this is a preface to the entire Ten Commandments. But the Jewish tradition, that becomes first commandment. Now, actually, I had prepared a three-column commandments. First column, the Jewish commandment. Second, the Greek Orthodox tradition. And third, the Catholic Lutheran tradition. And I found the slide is so small. I found it more apt to just divide into two. The first commandment, for Israel there shall be no other gods, because the Lord is a jealous God. That's why that was part of uh, the thematic statement that I had on the very first slide. That is from chapter 20, verse 5. I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents. Um, and this will be repeated elsewhere in different parts of the Pentateuch. Just for example, 34:14. For you shall worship no other God, because the Lord whose name is jealous is a jealous God. And NRSV, which I am following right now, his name is jealous, and J is capital letter. like very strange. God's name is his name is jealous and capital J. Okay. Uh, how do you explain this? Very strange. Means Yahweh will not tolerate any rivals for the people's devotion. God will not tolerate. God will not tolerate any rivals for the people's devotion. That's the meaning of saying the Lord's name or His character. Name actually stands for a character in the Hebrew tradition. Name stands for character. That is why all the Hebrew names have a meaning, a specific meaning attached to the name. Okay. Um, the meaning of the statement that God is a jealous God because the Lord has a singular claim on Israel, which demonstrates his loyalty through the body language of worship. In 23:30, for example, in verbal prayer, they should not utter the name of other gods. So even body language of worship should be in line with the strict monotheism that God, Yahweh God, has a singular claim on Israel, and we have to show our loyalty even through our body language. That's why verse 23, verse 13, chapter 23. Pay attention to all that I have said to you. Make no mention of the names of other gods, nor let it be heard on your lips. Yeah. In verses 4 to 6, the instruction is for imageless worship of the Lord that made Israel's faith unique in the ancient world. Why is that unique in the ancient world? Because all other ancient cultures made statues of the natural powers they personified, whether animal or human. And in the context of this natural worship of elements or deifying the nature, Israel's God said no worship of any images. And that follows prohibition against the improper invocation of the divine name, including any abusive name for God, such as cursing or swearing by the divine name, which is considered blasphemy. So the divine name is sacred. That is why when they translated into Greek, that tetragrammaton, four-letter word, no? Ya, Ha, Wa, Ha, which the Christians and others try to call it as Yahweh, Yehovah. The Jews would never pronounce that because the name is so sacred, they cannot pronounce it. Greek followed Kyrie, Lord, which is translated in English as Lord. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, they wrote in the ancient archaic the four Hebrew letter, or sometimes they just put four dots. So when in the Dead Sea Scrolls of the biblical text, when the sacred name of God came, they just put four dots. So those who read it, they know it is Yahweh's name. Uh, Traditionally, uh, when these four-letter words appeared, they would pronounce it as Adonai, and strict Jews even today will not even pronounce Adonai. They just say Hashem, the name. Now there was a problem in the New Testament. The Kyrie, the Septuagint translation called God as the Lord. In the New Testament Gospels, Jesus is called Lord. And that was a big problem for the Jewish people. Because how can um, God, how can the name given to Yahweh God be given to another person, Jesus? And it was really scandalized for them. Okay, then verse 8 to 11, keeping the Sabbath holy means to observe it as a day separated from others. So a particular segment of time belonging especially to God. So in a week, where there are 7 days, 6 days of activities, and seventh day is meant for God. Um, there are a number of texts in the commentaries um, to state that traditionally in the Canaanite and other ancient cultures, seventh day was considered as a bad day, a day in which there are even like demonic powers, and so that is not a day ideal for any work, with a day with bad omens. So originally nobody did any work on that day because they were afraid that there could be demonic powers and so on. Anyway, in the Jewish tradition, whatever be the origin, they kept that day as a holy, and they dedicated to the worship of Yahweh. Um, Actually, if you look at verse 2 to 12, there are five commandments. Um, verse 12 is honoring the parents, father and mother. In the traditional Hebrew calculation, out of 10, five commandments were dedicated to the Lord God, and five commandments in relationship with the human beings. So perfect division. Out of 10, five for God, five for human beings. And interestingly, see, honoring parents was considered an extension of divine respect. Even the honoring of God was considered divine. Okay, that's so our new culture may find it difficult to understand. The importance given to respect for the parents. In fact, later on in the covenantal code, you see disrespect or curse of the parents will invite capital punishment. So, out of the 10 commandments, five commandments directed to God, five commandments that govern human relationship. Now now that the commandments are stated, the text takes us to the traditional storm, storm and the theophany, verse 18. When all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking, they were afraid and trembled and stood at a distance. Um, this is the conclusion to the theophany, which began in chapter 19. So, between the two accounts of theophany, we have the presentation of the Decalogue, Ten Commandments. It is in this text that we are going to see that people are asking um, God or asking Moses to be their mediator. So there's a dramatic effect of the theophany. People are afraid because of all the elements of theophany. The dramatic effect is that people are frightened by the thunder and lightning, and their speech shows fear at the hearing of the divine speech. In verse 19, they are telling Moses, You speak to us, and we will listen. But do not let God speak to us, or we will die. They're afraid, so frightened. So basically, from the E tradition, which says that if you go near God, if you see God directly, you may die. Now, Moses is trying to give courage to people, saying, do not be afraid. God has come only to test you and put the fear of Him upon you so that you do not sin. Only um, Moses can withstand the full brunt of the divine presence because he is the mediator. He can approach God anytime, not the human being. So people ask Moses to speak to them on behalf of God instead of God speaking to them directly. And Moses gave them the courage. He says, why? Why? They should not be afraid of, because God is only testing them so that they may not sin. In chapter 20, verse 12 to 23:33, we have what we call the covenant code. I mentioned earlier that this is the first and the oldest code set of laws in the Pentateuch. The first and the longest, first and the most ancient is the covenant code in Exodus. Then we have the Levitical code or the holiness code in the book of Leviticus, and then the Deuteronomic code in the book of Deuteronomy. So they actually reflect the faith of Israel, and it presupposes a settled agricultural society. The rules and regulations given reflect a life of people. It's already settled down, and they reflect a situation after the settlement in Canaan, the land of Canaan, when prevailing laws were borrowed and adapted to the covenant tradition. We'll go through some of the important features of this commandment, so-called covenant code, verse 22 to 26. 22 to 26 is the introduction to the cultic regulations. There are two things that we note here. One is 24b. 24b. What does it say? It allowed plurality of cult places, and worship was lawful in any place in which Yahweh had manifested His presence. This is important because in the book of Exodus, they allow plurality of cultic places and worship centers. Instead, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 12, 5, or 13, chapter 16 says, there is only one sanctuary. So the theology of Deuteronomy is one God, one worship, and one place of worship. That's in Jerusalem. This is the main difference over plurality of cult places in Exodus. And the second instruction is not to go up to the steps of the altar. You shall not go up by steps to my altar, so that your nakedness may not be exposed on it. How do you explain that? See, um, they were the reason is this. It is related to the manner of dressing at the time of sacrifice. See, when they offered sacrifices, only a loin cloth was worn. I think even in some of the Hindu temples, you'd have seen the pujaris. They don't wear. They don't cover their upper part of the body. Instead, they have their a special consecrated um, um, yeah, what do you call the twine, which is the thread, consecrated thread, and that's all. And they don't wear anything on the upper body. So even the loin cloth that was worn when sacrifices were offered. So hence, there was the risk of indecency when you mount the altar steps. That is the meaning of this. You shall not go up to the steps. So two things. One is the plurality of cultic centers. Secondly, instruction not to go up to the altar because of indecency. Okay, we go to the next section, chapter 21, verse 1 to 11, concerning the slaves. There are or the rights of the slaves that are stipulated. If you look at verse 2, when you buy a male Hebrew slave, slavery was allowed. Hebrews also were slaves in the land of Israel. Okay. Originally, Hebrew is meant Habiru. Habiru is more a sociological term. They are displaced people, malcontents who harassed the ancient Near Eastern culture. So they were all people who were disorganized and malcontented, the people who were a nuisance to the others. They were called Habiru, translated as Hebrew. But but in that context, it is today Hebrew means an Israelite. In verse 4, it's with regard to if the master gives him a wife, that is a slave, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's. He shall go out alone. It's a very strange stipulation. See, if the slave has married, or during his slavery, he marries, then he does not have a right over his wife. The wife and the children will belong to the master, which is very strange. As it is to perpetuate the slavery. If he wants, he can go alone. He cannot take the wife. And the slave could be freed in the 7th year. So suppose he wanted to retain his wife and children in the 7th year, he had to undergo a rite in which he would renounce publicly his right to freedom and accept permanent servitude by allowing his ear to be pierced. So he is going through a rite in which he is allowing his ears to be pierced. Most probably, to wear an earring, symbolizing his permanent slavery. So slavery was there existing in the Jewish community. From the 7th year, they should be freed. But if he wants to take his wife and children, then he has to do this. That is, unfortunately, perpetuating the system of slavery. You know, the parallel passage in Deuteronomy chapter 15, 12 to 18 is more humane than the Exodus law, which is very much older than the Deuteronomistic code. So, Deuteronomy chapter 15, 12 to 18 would allow both male and female slaves to go free in the seventh year. So, and the owner was asked to give them provisions for their future. Okay, so this is a major difference with regard to the law of slavery. But you know, the Hebrew slave was more than a pagan slave because a pagan slave had no right at all. But he was less than a citizen. Does not have all the rights of a citizen. They said both the Exodus and Deuteronomy would state that a slave can be set free in the seventh year. But problem in the Exodus, if he wants to retain his wife and children, he has to give up his right. But in Deuteronomy, a rule that came later, they could be left free in the what we call the sabbatical year, seventh year. Verse 12 to 17 is regard to the homicide, laws about homicide, 12 to 17. There are four laws that prescribe capital punishment to premeditated murderers, so called murder, pre-planned murder. So those who attack or curse their parents, and their Israelite legislation is more demanding than that of the ancient Near Eastern in general with regard to abuse or attack of the parents. Then, those who kidnap people for slave trade, capital punishment. And unintentional murderers were exempted. So, by accident, that someone is murdered by accident. Okay, they may have been attempting to kill an animal, for example, but without knowledge, instead of the animal, the human being is killed. Homicide, there is an exception because they say all accidents are attributed to God. God is responsible for all accidents. So there is a distinction that is made between intentional and unintentional murder. Um, Unintentional and intentional murder. I think I will specify here. As a person has killed another person unintentionally, without reason to kill, I mean, by accident, then he has to take shelter because any murder is punishable. So he can um, get an asylum at the altar, holding on to the altar. The altar, holding on to the horn of the altar, then nobody can kill him. You can have that reference in First Kings chapter 2, 28 to 34. You can read by yourself. But there's an example of a murderer who takes shelter onto the horn of the altar, and he has to be protected. That's First Kings chapter 2, 28 to 34. 18 to 36. with regard to laws with regarding wounds and blows. There are 7 laws regarding wounds and blows and about remuneration to be paid to victim. What about this law of retaliation? Law of retaliation. See, Exodus 21, 23 to 24. If any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. This is traditionally known as, in English, law of retaliation, but technically a Latin word, lex talionis. Lex talionis. See, it was so common that all the 3 Pentateuchal codes have mentioned about this law of retaliation. Exodus, that comes under covenantal code. Leviticus, that comes under Levitical or holiness code. And Deuteronomy, it is in the Deuteronomy code. So all the 3 are there. So what is the, how do you explain this law of retaliation? Um, that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for life, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, and so on. What's the purpose of this so-called law of retaliation? This is not a license for unrestrained vengeance, but a limitation of a measureless revenge. And we explained this when we took the Lamech story of Genesis, when a sevenfold vengeance, that vengeance is not part of the biblical tradition. Here, even the sevenfold vengeance, remember, Moses is giving the law to the tribe, the ancient nomadic tribal people for whom the status of a tribe depends on the revenge that they take. So suppose one member of the tribal community is murdered, then it is the responsibility of the tribe to take revenge by killing 7 others. That was the normal um, custom. So to this type of nomadic tribal people, Moses is saying the maximum that you can give back is the same amount of same measure of harm done, not more. So it is the limitation, maximum that you can put, not that they should take revenge. So many laws here are very practical, things that they deal with the everyday problem of law and order. Then 22, 1 to 4 is about uh, laws regarding theft of animals. There are 2 laws with regard to the theft. First, according to the first law, the thief should pay back either 5 times, that is 22 1, or at least 2 times. The thief should pay back 5 times or at least 2 times. Then with regard to the social morality, that is in chapter 22, verse 18 to 28, and 23, 1 to 9. There are laws regarding um, the social Sorry. Next is an important section on social morality, uh, practicing justice and performing duties towards neighbors and even towards enemies. We have that in chapter 22, 18 to 18 and 20. Chapter 22, verse 18 to 20. In this section, there are issues with regard to sorcery, sexual relation with animals, and idolatry. They are all crimes deserving capital punishment. So, punishment of death was prescribed for many crimes, and three such crimes: one, sorcery; second is sexual relation with the animals; and thirdly, idolatry. Then I would like you to carefully look at verses 20 to 28. They are laws regarding compassion and justice. Verse 20 to 28. And that is a famous statement, or the right of the disenfranchised, those who do not have the right. Verse 21. You shall not wrong or oppress a resident alien, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I would like to share with you a very important piece of information with regard to verse 21. See, all the ancient cultures, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and especially in the laws of Hammurabi, the great Babylonian lawgiver, there's a provision given to the protection of the weak members of society, especially the widows and orphan. Widows and orphan. Um, Hammurabi calls himself as the servant of Shamash, the sun god, to make sure that justice is not denied to the widows and orphan. But in the Bible, there is a biblical triad. Which are the members of the biblical triad? Widows, orphan, and the foreigner. Now, Bible makes a revolutionary statement, uh, because a sojourner or a foreigner does not have any right outside his country. Even today, many of the modern societies, let's say we need a visa to enter a new country, and there are a lot of restrictions put on foreigners. No voting power. There are so many rules and regulations with regard to the with regard to the entry of the foreigners. But you see, please look carefully, verse 21, and that will be repeated also in Leviticus. You shall not wrong or oppress a resident alien, for you were aliens in a foreign land. So you shall not forget your own status when you were foreigners in the land of Israel. So from verse 21 going up to 27, especially going up to 27, 28. So Israel's God is the protector of the legally defenseless. So who are the legally defenseless? The foreigner or a alien, we call it a sojourner, orphan, widow, and the poor. In the text of Zechariah chapter 7, verse 9, 8, 9, chapter 7. So you find all these four categories together. That's the only text in the Bible, Zechariah text, all the four categories of disenfranchised people together. It says, do not oppress the widow, orphan, foreigner, and the poor. And this is highlighted here because God, it takes care. God is the protector of the legally defenseless. Why they are defenseless? They, um, in the definition, biblical definition of an orphan, for example, is different from the definition of the Oxford Dictionary. An orphan in an Oxford Dictionary would be a person who has lost his father and mother. Otherwise, if he has got one parent, we call him as a semi-orphan. So, orphan is a person who has lost his father and mother. Not so in the Bible. In the Bible, a person who has lost his father is orphan because mother does not have any right. So orphan does not under. So to widow, widow in the Bible is generally understood a person who has lost, a woman who has lost her husband, not yet. I mean, Obama, a woman who has lost her husband and who does not have a grown-up son to look after her. That's why she is helpless. Suppose she has a grown-up son to look after, then she is not a widow in the strict sense because she has a family to take care. So the this biblical triad, the widow, orphan, and the alien, all these three have no rights in the society, and God wants to make sure that they are taken care properly. That's why these are called the laws of compassion and justice. Then, interestingly, chapter 23, verse 1 to 9, very interesting, very strange. Practicing justice and doing the duties towards enemies. There are 10 laws mentioned here, 10 laws, uttering false report and bearing false witnesses and so on. They're all prohibited. The duty towards the enemies are expounded in 23, 4 to 5. They are exemplary. Justice to the poor in lawsuits is insisted here, and bribery is denounced. Verse 6 to 8. Bribery is denounced. See, you shall not pervert the justice due to your poor in their lawsuits. Keep far from false charge. Do not kill the innocent. Verse 8, you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the officials and subverts the cause of those who are in right. Again in verse 9, you shall not oppress a resident alien. You know the heart of an alien, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. The reason why you should not oppress the alien, do not forget, because you have gone through the struggle of being an alien. Then, chapter 23, verse 20 to 33, the last part of the covenant code, there is a war of Yahweh for Israel. War of Yahweh for Israel. Um, This chapter 23 ends with the kind of a cultic calendar and the rules with regard to taking care of this biblical triad. Um, and 23 verse 20 to 33 is the conclusion to the covenant code. Conclusion to the covenant code. 24, chapter 24 beginning, the ceremony of the covenant ratification. How this covenant is sealed with a meal on Mount Sinai. There are two accounts of the sealing of the covenant. In chapter 24, 1 to 2, and verse 9 to 11, which come from the J account, Yahwist account. The sealing of the covenant is performed with a meal on Mount Sinai. While chapter 24, 3 to 8, which is from the E writer, the sealing the covenant is with the blood rite. Um, there is a third tradition that speaks about this sealing the covenant, but that is in chapter 34, which I will border. So there are three accounts. The two are in this chapter. Let's quickly take the J account of the sealing of the covenant with a meal on Mount Sinai. That is in 24, 1 to 2, 9 to 11. The J account tells us that the covenant was sealed on Mount Sinai in the presence of Moses and the elders of Israel, and they celebrated with a covenant ceremony with a festive meal. What about the E account? That is from verse 3 to 8, which is the ceremony which stresses the participation of the people. That is basically from the Elohist tradition. So here we have the ancient tradition of Moses writing down, Moses writing down the law given to Israel by Yahweh. So the written book of the covenant code was read before the people. So the E tradition speaks of an elaborate covenant ceremony with a blood rite under the leadership of Moses. How is it done? An altar is built, burnt sacrifices were offered on the altar. So Moses took the blood of the sacrificed animal and threw half of it against the altar, and the other half is sprinkled over the people as a sign of their acceptance and the ratification of the covenant, saying, behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. That is in 24, verse 8. Moses took the blood and dashed it on the people and said, see the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. So two traditions. One with a festive meal for the day writer, the other through a blood rite. Now Moses goes up to the mountain, verse 12 to 18. Moses is on the mountain for 40 days and nights. Yeah, again there are two traditions. Moses on the mountain for 40 days and nights. Another tradition, Moses on the mountain for 7 days. That's why there's a combination of two traditions. Most probably, the E tradition, which is chapter 24, verse 12 onwards, E tradition tells us that Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. P tradition, which is chapter 24, verse 15, say Moses was on the mountain for 7 days. Um, so Moses was called by God to the top of the mountain, where he would be given the stone tablets on which, God Himself inscribed the law and the commandments for the purpose of instructing the people. See, Joshua accompanied Moses on the top of the mountain, and Aaron was left at the foot of the mountain with the Uri um, to settle the problems of the people. 24:14. Joshua and Moses went up to the mountain of God. To the elders, he had said, "Wait here for us until we come to you again. For Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a dispute may go to them." So, this is a separate tradition of the gift of the tablet of a stone on which the Decalogue was written. This, according to this tradition, Moses and Joshua went up because Joshua is going to continue the tradition given to Moses. In the book of Joshua, it will be clearly said that Joshua is the second Moses. All that Moses did, now Joshua will do. Just like Moses helped the people of Israel to cross the Sea of Reeds or Red Sea, it will be Joshua who will help them to cross the river Jordan, and most of the miracles also will be repeated. So Moses imagined that the huge crowd is there because he has already experienced their rebellion in Massa and Meribah and so on. So, in order to settle their problem, he left Aaron and Huri on the foot of the mountain, and he went up. So Moses remained on the top of the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, in the second part of chapter 24, verse 15b to 18a, which I said is most probably from the key writer, the glory of God. The glory of God, in Hebrew it is called kabod. It has got a lot of nuances. Literally, it means heavy, but it means the glory of God. It's the manifestation of God's presence. And there is a fire and um, cloud they accompany and they surround the place. And there's a brilliant light that stands for the God's unapproachable majesty. Okay, so we will see in the coming class the it's all about divine worship. Chapter 25 to chapter 31 is from the priestly writer. 25 to 31 clearly passages from the priestly writer speaking about divine worship. So we will not need much time, but I'll give you in the slides those parallels of the cultic furnishings. I'll speak about the ark, which is going to be a very important theme in that section. Then from 32 going up to 34, it's again about the covenant. It is in that section that we come to know the molten calf of gold. Aaron making the molten calf, and Yahweh getting angry, and Moses breaking the covenant by his people, because Moses broke the tablets of commandments, because people broke the covenant, that we will see in the coming week. Coming week, I think Brother Dixon will tell you that we will not have it on Thursday and Saturday as we have been doing, because coming Thursday is the Holy Thursday or Maundy Thursday, and that's a time that most of us Christians would be spending our time in the church or in our places of worship and celebrating the victory of the Passover. I think the book of Exodus that we have been reading is a very good preparation for this greatest event in the history of Israel, the Passover celebration. So we will have a change of timing of the class. Most probably it will be on Tuesday or Wednesday, Tuesday and Wednesday. But the minister will inform you, or the Samuel will inform you about the timings. Okay, so we don't like to miss the classes, even though it is the Holy Week coming week. But we also don't want to distract you with your intimate and immediate preparation for Easter on a Holy Thursday and Good Friday and Holy Saturday. So we will, I will discuss with them and we'll let you know. Okay. So tomorrow is the Passions Week, Palm Sunday, the great event of the glorious entry of Jesus in Jerusalem for the first time, according to the synoptic writers. Jesus entering the holy city, not as kings of the past riding on the horseback, but like a humble servant riding on the donkey's back. So this is the memory that we are going to keep tomorrow. And if you've got maybe a couple of questions, I could take it today. If there are major questions, I will take it for today. Okay. Okay, then that's fine. We will